Good afternoon, everybody. It's 2:30, so we will start today's seminar. My name is Patrick Van Horn, and I'm a Senior Managing Associate with Haggerty Consulting and the Program Manager for the MARC Complex Coordinated Terrorist Attack Exercise Series. Before we open today's event, I wanted to start off with some logistics information for all of you. First, I wanted to let everyone know that this session is being recorded. Following the seminar, we're going to share the recording with Erin Lynch and her team at MARC, and they will be distributing and sharing the recording once they have it. To help provide a high quality presentation, we just ask that the audience members remain on mute throughout the presentation today. Second, there will be two opportunities for questions. The first will be following a presentation with Brock Long and Jesse Nalepa, and the second will be following our conversation with Mayor Margot. To ask a question, please use the chat feature at the bottom of your Zoom window. Our team will be receiving and sorting all of these questions, but we did want to let everyone know that in the case that we don't have an answer to a question or that we don't get to a question today, we will be sending out an email before the end of the week with answers to all the remaining questions, as well as some other notes and documents from today's seminar. With that, I'd like to turn it over to the chair of the MARC Board of Directors and Miami County Commissioner, Rob Roberts, for the opening remarks. Commissioner?
Good afternoon. Thank you, Patrick. Hopefully you can hear me fine. Very good. Good afternoon, all. I'm Rob Roberts, the chairman of the Miami County Commissioners, and it's an honor to be the chairman of the Mid-America Regional Council. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon to continue our ongoing efforts to prepare together. Today, we're focusing on a crucial role we, as elected and senior officials, have before, during, and after an intentional attack. However, while the focus may be on the intentional attacks, what we're discussing today is relevant across many types of incidences. Recent incidents, certainly the one we're dealing with right now, the pandemic, civil unrest, last year's tornadoes, or let's face it, the recent hurricanes and flooding. These all underscore the fact that when these events occur, they may stretch the limited resources of our agencies or jurisdictions. And these events, they don't respect boundaries. They will most likely impact multiple jurisdictions across city, county, and state lines. So there's a tremendous value and a necessity in working together to prepare and to support one another. I want to make a personal appreciation and thank you to all of emergency services personnel, the police, sheriff, fire, EMS, emergency management, public information officers, dispatchers, medical examiners, hospitals, and other agencies across our Kansas City region that have been working tirelessly over the past several years to increase our readiness for these events. As elected officials, we rely on you to know your job and to perform it when the time comes. Our Regional Homeland Security Coordinating Committee has provided a range of trainings, workshops, and exercises to help all of our agencies hone their skills, better understand what to expect, and to practice working together within their own communities and absolutely as a region. We so appreciate this important work. As a key part of the region's preparedness, it's an important role for us, the elected officials and appointed officials, to have in any kind of emergency. We're expected to provide information and reassurance to the most difficult times. Think about these two questions as we go through this seminar. How do we put ourselves in the best position to do this? What should we expect when there are a large number of fatalities or, God forbid, casualties? We're fortunate today to have individuals with us who have a range of experiences that I think all of us can benefit from, including responding to intentional attacks. And they're willing to share those experiences and insight. I encourage you to take the opportunity today and engage in the discussion so we can all feel better prepared to lead through this crisis. I'd like to turn it back over to Patrick now with the Haggerty Consulting and lead us through this process, Patrick. Thank you for your help as we go through this.
Thank you, Commissioner. To open up today's session, we're going to begin with the presentation on communicating with the public to build trust during a complex incident. Our two speakers for this presentation are Brock Long and Jesse Nalepa. Jesse Nalepa is Hagerty Consulting's Communications Director, responsible for driving the company's external communication strategy and brand through effective media engagement. Prior to joining Hagerty, Jesse spent nearly a decade in federal service. Most recently, she served as the Director of External Affairs for the Federal Emergency Management Agency. In this role, she managed the daily operations of the agency's public affairs, strategic communications, congressional and intergovernmental affairs, as well as the Ready.gov campaign. During her tenure at FEMA, Jesse also served as the Director of Congressional Affairs, where she was the agency's principal liaison with the U.S. Congress and ensured that the agency's priorities were reflected throughout the legislative and oversight process. A proven crisis communications expert, Jesse has effectively coordinated and led FEMA's external communications and engagement strategy for over 234 presidentially declared disasters, including the coronavirus pandemic. Before her service in the executive branch, Jesse spent nearly 7 years on Capitol Hill. She culminated her Capitol Hill career by serving as the Chief of Staff to U.S. Congressman Michael McCall, then Chairman of the House Committee on Homeland Security. A loyal George Mason University patriot, Jesse is a two-time graduate holding a bachelor's degree in government and international politics with a minor in political communications, as well as a master's degree in public policy with a focus in national security. Brock Long is the former FEMA administrator, confirmed in June 2017 by the U.S. Senate with a strong bipartisan support. Brock served as the nation's principal advisor to the president responsible for coordinating the entire array of federal government resources down through 50 states, 537 tribal governments, and 16 island territories to assist them with executing disaster preparedness, mitigation, response, and recovery. Brock is the 10th administrator and the youngest to hold the office. While serving as the administrator, Brock coordinated with the federal government's response to over 144 presidentially declared disasters and 112 wildfires, including 3 of the nation's most devastating hurricanes and 5 of the worst wildfires ever experienced. During this time, nearly $44 billion of disaster activity occurred under the various federal recovery programs that he managed. In addition to participating in the Federal Commission on School Safety that was created following the tragic shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in 2018, Brock has led 2 major initiatives as the FEMA administrator, which will have long-lasting impacts on the emergency management community. He rapidly transformed the agency's business enterprise by implementing innovative community lifelines and FEMA's integration team concepts to strengthen public-private partnerships, as well as permanently embedding full-time staff within the offices of state and tribal governments to better meet the constituent needs. Further, as a result of effective advocacy and 8 influential congressional testimonies, Congress passed the Disaster Recovery Reform Act and made pre-disaster mitigation a national priority, which provided meaningful changes to the FEMA workforce and bolstered state and local emergency management capability. From 2008 to 2011, Brock served as the director for Alabama's Emergency Management Agency under Governor Bob Riley. As director, he served as the state coordinating officer for 14 disasters, including 8 presidentially declared events. Brock has also served as the on-scene state incident commander for the Alabama Unified Command during the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. Brock and Jesse, I turn it over to you, and thank you for your presentation.
All right, thanks, Patrick. I appreciate it, Commissioner Roberts. Thanks for the introduction, and I'm very thankful for all of you being here today. You know, one of the biggest things you got to do is build a culture of preparedness within your community, and that starts with the community's leadership. You know, going through so many different disasters, whether it's been natural disasters, and I've also seen the ramifications and been a part of several shooting events throughout my 21-year career. You know, the bottom line is that anytime I would take a leadership, role or getting ready for disasters or hurricane season, whatever it may be, I always wanted to ask myself the question of, if I was pulled in front of Congress or a court of law and asked, did I do everything I could to be prepared, or did I do everything in the response that I knew to do? I wanted to be able to answer positively on that. And I think all of you as community leaders need to do the same. You know, right now, a lot of times, emergency management, disaster preparedness, mitigation response, a lot of that gets put on the back burner because you have other issues that are, that are hitting you each and every day. And we understand that. but many communities have been devastated, by complex terrorist attacks, shooting events, natural disasters. And if the leadership doesn't know who their emergency managers are or is not surrounded by a solid public safety team that they work regularly with, they typically don't do as well during complex disasters and events. Right off the bat too, you need to understand your role as a community leader. If you're a councilman, chairman, mayor, what is your role, and where does your public safety leadership need you to be? What battles do they need you to fight? Not only in the preparedness arena, but when the response hits, and then often in the recovery. A lot of times you'll see many community leaders get way down into the weeds when it comes to these disasters. They're trying to make, several incident command decisions and not relying upon their staff. And I think that that's a big mistake. Your job as a community leader, you are the chief executive, right? The buck does stop with you, and realize that. But you have to surround yourself with good people and rely on your team and trust your team and maintain unity of effort. If you're getting down and you're having multiple phone calls coming in, which is a very likely possibility coming in from all different aspects, there's no way to properly filter this information when an event is taking place. And if you start making arbitrary decisions that are outside incident command that's taking place in the EOC, it can be detrimental to the entire operation. So you need to understand with your public safety now on a blue sky day, where you plug into this operation and what role they need you to play. The other thing is not just getting to know your key players within your team, but establishing blue sky day relationships with the media in your community. Whether you love them or hate them, I would encourage you to go establish relationships, have brown bag lunches, on a regular basis, and talk about what's going to be needed from them during a complex coordinated attack or an active shooter event. You need to sit down and use them as a force multiplier that you may need to put them in different situations or project different types of information. The other thing that you got to do is understand your authorities. As a community leader, what are your authorities to make decisions? Do you have the ability to shut down different things such as transportation, mass transit? Do you have the authority? Has it ever been written? Is there a local ordinance that defines what your authorities are for evacuation or shelter-in-place guidance? And in some cases, your decisions can have cascading effects, which is what we saw during the Boston Marathon bombing. There was this event took place over multiple locations. And in some cases where transportation was shut down, it arbitrarily started what was thought to be a shelter in place, but nobody actually ever issued the shelter in place. It was just a consequence of the transportation authority shutting down all activities and nobody could go anywhere. So you've got to make sure that you're not operating in a vacuum. Again, trusting your team, building, that unity of effort. The other thing that you've got to do is like I said, embody a culture of preparedness. If and all of you being here is a big start. What are you doing to mitigate potential targets within your community? How do you receive regular threat assessment information on a, quarterly basis or a monthly basis? Are there any private organizations or activities going on in your community? Because of their activities or because of their actions or because of their beliefs, they're going to heighten the threat levels within your community and be attacked. For example, the Charlie Hebdo satirical newspaper in Paris was basically putting out stories that upset a group of people that came in and basically planned a highly complex coordinated attack across the city of Paris and shut it down. So who is giving you this information? How are you coordinating information across 9 jurisdictions? And when are you updated on what is truly the threat assessment of your communities that are taking place? What should you be on the lookout for? What should your citizens be on the lookout for? How do we incorporate your citizens as part of this team? Be aware of the events that escalate the threat potential. The other thing too that's really important is citizens are oftentimes the true first responder for any one of these events. 56% of the time, if you look at some of the latest FBI statistics, these events begin and end before police even arrive. And so, with that, it causes me to scratch my head to say, are we truly building a true culture of preparedness within our citizenry? And how often do we, throughout a community, encourage learn CPR, learn CPR. 1 in 4 of us in our lifetime is going to do CPR. But if you haven't done it in the last 3 years, then what you know is antiquated. It's old. There are other efforts like Stop the Bleed campaign, but in some cases, it's not just stopping the bleed, it's helping someone breathe that has airway obstructions. If you look at the battlefield statistics of these shootings and different terrorist events, it's not just bleeding to death, it's also airway obstructions. How are we training your own staff versus how are we also encouraging citizens to be prepared? Because ultimately, the decisions that they make are going to be most important. And in many cases, citizens have actually stopped these events from becoming even worse. The other thing about as we move in to the response phase, you've got to establish a clear span of control. As a leader, you're going to have you're going to be bombarded by information. And if you have 10 or 15 people in your ear during a large event, you're never going to be able to filter it correctly. And in many cases, if you lose span of control, you will not have an effective unifying response effort that goes forward. You've got to be able to manage information and filter out noise that's coming in. And in some cases, mayors, I understand, for example, get a ton of phone calls and ask for requests, or you need to be doing this, or you need to be doing that, or I need this resource, or I need that resource. If you're not, before you make any commitments to anybody outside of the EOC, you need to coordinate with your EOC to come back and say, what's legal here? What resources do you have? How are you solving this problem? But the bottom line is be careful about the commitments and who you're listening to, and make sure that your span of control is no more than 5 to 7 people putting information in your ear during these events. And you've got to surround yourself with the right people to do that. The other thing that your role during response is setting expectations. And I know that Jesse and Alepa is going to go through this a little bit more, but the bottom line is that your community is going to be looking to you to establish calm and also their expectations going through an event. Okay. If you are in clear arguments over the media with others in the response or other communities or the state or the federal government as they come in to help, you will erode the confidence of your citizens in total leadership of the event that's taking place. Your goal is to clearly explain what has happened to based on the information you have right now, what actions you are taking and in control of, and 3, setting expectations for what to expect in the coming days. Okay? You do not want to get into chasing what I call rabbits. How many deaths have there been? Who are the shooters? Who are the perpetrators? You need to stick to the facts that you know, and you need to make sure that before you're putting out information that these facts have been verified by your EOC or by your public safety staff or whoever's going to be putting that through. Another major job of yours is going to be cross-sector, cross-jurisdictional communications. How are you guys looking at threats or activity across multiple jurisdictions and understanding trends or things that are happening in other jurisdictions? How are you being alerted? Not only just from 8 to 5 when you're in the office, but at night or on weekends and different things. How are you exchanging information rapidly to make sure that the event that you're experiencing is not also connected to other events that are occurring in other communities? Because often when you see these complex, coordinated attacks, there are diversionary tactics that take place by, well thought out, terrorists that want to be able to inflict harm on your community. So you've got to be able to tie these things together. The other thing is pointing people in the right direction on where they can go for information or where they can provide information. If you think about the response phase, there's going to be a huge initial investigation that's taking place. People see things or people want to report things. And in some cases, how does your public safety, work to understand all the information and the volume of information that's coming in to understand what's legitimate and what actions you need to be taking on that. And then finally, and I'll wrap it up before I pass it on to Jesse and Alepa, the recovery phase of any type of terrorism event or active shooter event is the longest and most arduous, difficult phase of all. Think about this. A lot of times, there could be investigations that go on for months. There can be, access denied to various infrastructure or aspects of your community that will be blocked because investigations are taking place. Staff will be exhausted. There's a greater need for mutual aid in recovery in some cases than there is during the response. And if it's multiple jurisdictions, you can't always depend on the response-based mutual aid efforts, because if other communities are being attacked, they're less likely to provide your community with support. But when it comes to the recovery efforts, put yourself as a police officer in this. You've just gone through the response phase. Now you're involved in an investigation. And then over time, what you're going to start to see are memorials. You're going to start seeing lawsuits. You're going to start seeing court battles possibly. And you may even have dignitaries. You may have the President of the United States fly into your community just after a disaster out of recognition, of the event. So a lot of these things will continue to cascade for many years after. If you look at the Pulse nightclub shooting in Florida, the community actually had to purchase the facility, if I recall correctly, because it became a makeshift memorial. And it was basically purchased by the city. And now there's larger plans as to what to do with that building down the road. And then finally, a couple things. One, how do you continue to meet your mission essential critical functions as a community despite an event? When you lose people, when you lose access to equipment, or when you're denied access to buildings or whatever because of an event that takes place. Continuity of operations is incredibly important, and more importantly, continuity of government if a government is attacked. How does that work? A lot of communities don't really walk through their continuity of government and their line of succession at the local level until it becomes a real problem. And then finally, the thing about FEMA in these types of disasters, very rarely does FEMA declare these events and provide funding to you, to help pay for the response. So these, the response and paying for these types of events can be extremely difficult. Maintain your rainy day funds. You never know when you're going to need them, and understand how disaster recovery cost reimbursement may or may not happen. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jesse Nalepa.
Great, thanks so much, Brock, and I really appreciate being here with everybody today. So as Patrick mentioned at the top, for the past 3 years prior to joining Hagerty, I served as the Director of External Affairs at FEMA, and one of the things I did in that role was help a lot of officials across the agency prepare for how they were going to respond, especially when you had the national media beckoning at your door, which with these situations in today's environment is all too common. And so I'm going to take you guys through just a very quick presentation about Crisis Communications 101, the 6 things that I have learned over the years that are really important. I'll throw in a couple of real life examples that I've seen throughout my tenure over the past almost decade and a half in communications, and feel free to ask any questions after we get through the quick presentation here. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with all of you so you can see. And then we will provide this as well after the presentation. We will provide the presentation to all of you. Okay, so the first, just a really quick baseline so everybody's on the same page. Crisis communications is really just an emergent situation beyond an organization's control that requires an immediate response. I think the most important thing to highlight here is that during a response like this, it's almost all too common that the media is right on your heels. You also have a lot of social media and information and disinformation that can get out ahead of you and your organization and your community. And so it's very vital to be prepared, have a plan going into a situation like this, and be organized. So next, we're going to talk about the 6 C's of crisis communications. Really, these are the key cornerstones to a successful communications response when you have an event like this. Whether it be a natural or man-made event, I think all of these apply. Over the course of the time that I worked with both FEMA and previously Chairman McCall, who was the chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee, I served as his chief of staff for 3 years, worked for him for a total of 7. But during that time, there were multiple homegrown terrorism events. The Boston bombing was actually the marathon bombing was actually one of his first couple of months as chairman. And so he was looked to as a national expert in the field and really had to be a leader. And I learned a lot of what I'll share with you today from that experience as well. So first, coordination. Coordination is really important because you need to know what you're doing going into a situation like this. The event will unfold very rapidly, as Brock mentioned, and so you have to have a plan going in. This is not a step-by-step guide that's going to tell you every step of the way what you need to be doing, but really a framework so that everybody within your organization knows their role and knows what they need to be doing during an event. The second is establishing partnerships. This is external to your organization with key community and organization leaders so that they know how to help amplify the critical messaging that your organization is getting out at the time of the event. This could be with churches or other organizations in the area who will be helping take care of people who may be injured. This is with other organizations in your community that have a great grasp on how to get important information out to your residents. Then it's establishing key messages and drafting them in advance. So you're not going to be able to pre-script every single thing that you're likely going to need to say. The events will dictate what those messages say, but you will be able to have at least a framework of what kind of content needs to go out. So pre-drafting, whether you guys send press releases, whether it's social media posts, Facebook, Twitter, whatever your mode of communication is to get information out to the public. As Brock said, maybe it is a text message that goes out to your residents. Having some sort of format that you know will work when you need to send those is really, really critical. It also expedites the time for the approval process, which Patrick informed me is something you guys have been talking through over the course of the series. There has to be a chain of command of who needs to approve what content before it goes out the door. Otherwise, you're going to have a lot of mixed messages and confusion potentially from the community. And so really you need to make sure that your spokespeople, council, maybe some other relevant senior officials within your community have access to determine, if that message is approved to go out and be able to do that very quickly. Because as I said, a lot of information will be flying around, and especially in the initial phases of the response. So with that is establishing command and control of the situation as quickly as possible, not letting it play out in front of you. Timeliness is very, very key. Again, in the age of social media, some misinformation and disinformation can get out there, and especially if you're asking the public to take protective actions or, as Brock mentioned, maybe shutting down transit, you need to be able to have that timely information to get it out to the public in a very clear and concise way. But with that, it's important to be accurate as well. Just throwing information out there for the sake of throwing it out there also causes confusion and can diminish credibility in these situations. And as Brock mentioned, these typically are long duration events. And so you want the public to see you and your community as really establishing leadership in the situation so that they will continue to have that rapport with you as you go throughout the duration of the event. Also, consistent communication is imperative. You need to make sure that you're communicating with the public on a regular basis. They know when to expect the updates that your community is going to be providing them and in what format to expect it in, whether it be a press conference, whether it be a social media, live chat. There are a lot of different ways that you guys can accomplish this depending on what best meets the needs of your community. But I will say that in a crisis, no comment is a comment, especially for a senior official or an elected leader. The audience is looking to you to tell them what is going on. They're lacking information. They need to know if they need to do anything else to keep them and their family, their friends safe. They're looking to you for guidance. And so it's really important to make sure that you're giving enough information without impeding the investigation, obviously, but that so that the audiences know you understand what the situation is, that you have a good grasp on it, and they know what is coming next. And then it's also important, there are a ton of different audiences. I'm sure you guys deal with this on a regular basis, but you have the media, you have the public and your constituents, business owners, first responders, other elected officials, as Brock mentioned, especially in times of high profile events like this. Often it's common for, larger elected officials to come from the federal level, from the state level. And so being prepared for that and knowing what messages are most important to get to them and at what time. And then also something I learned at FEMA, especially as you're going through disasters, monitoring the public narrative is really key. Having someone on your team that is monitoring what is happening on social media, what the community is saying about the response to the event, and that helps target a little bit more your messaging, whether it be in that press conference or in a live chat, or if you're just pushing out social media content. Knowing what rumors and information is out there really can help you hone in and target on what that key messaging is. And then staying on message, right? There's a lot of things that can detract you in these scenarios and take you off course. The media is known also for throwing very targeted and political questions into a response event. You have to be the leader that steers the conversation back to stay on course, focusing on the immediate response, what lies ahead in the recovery, and then any actions that you need the public to take. As Brock mentioned, continuity of operations is really important for a successful response. You have to anticipate communications challenges, especially if some sort of incident or attack takes out communication modes. You have to be prepared for alternate ways of communicating with your residents. And so thinking through those in advance is really important. Something we saw, Brock and I both experienced in 2017 after Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico. It was extremely difficult for the federal government. We could communicate with one another, but we really could not communicate very well with the residents that were there on the island. And so it made it very challenging to establish the recovery progress and all of those things in the immediate aftermath of the response. And so, and also actions that we were asking the public themselves to take and do. And so it's really important to think through what those challenges might be and how your community can best address them in the time. And addressing the current response, whatever the anticipated recovery path is, and then ultimate restoration. There's going to be multiple phases. There's going to be a very long tail to a lot of these incidents, as Brock said. And so the community needs to know in the moment what is being done to address the crisis, but then what are the next steps? What is coming next? What can they anticipate? And that will continue to care. It's important to bring trust those audiences. Obviously, these significant impacts in the community, and they want to hear that their leaders in the community are understanding of that and acknowledging that. So making sure that you're communicating compassion for the victims, identifying what the actual cause of the crisis is, again, providing any necessary protective actions to the community, and discussing the way forward, how the community will move forward. So some key pitfalls to avoid to kind of recap everything, and then I'll turn it back over to Patrick. Effective crisis communication is not about predicting what can happen, but it's about preparing for it. I think all of us have experienced throughout our careers times where the best laid plans didn't turn out as we thought they would. And so really having that contingency plan and being prepared to how to respond is really, really important. One thing to avoid, mixed messages from multiple experts, making sure that the communication is clear and concise, know who has what role. Again, information that is released late, making sure that you're very timely but accurate with the communications. Avoiding paternalistic attitudes, no pointing the fingers, no kind of brushing off maybe concerns that the community may have, really addressing those front on. Making sure to counter rumors and myths in real time so those don't spread and cause greater confusion, especially when a chaotic event is unfolding. And then minimizing any confusion and appearance of power struggles amongst other elected leaders, as Brock mentioned, and I think as all of us are discussing today, a lot of these events can have impacts on multiple jurisdictions, so having that communication and coordination in advance is really important. So again, these are some quick tips. We'll share these with you guys as well after the presentation, but really appreciate y'all being here today, and Brock and I will be happy to answer any questions.
Brock and Jesse, thank you so much for your presentation. We have gotten a number of great comments to us, but no questions right now. People seem to be very appreciative of the national perspective that we're now going to tie into hearing from a local leader. To introduce our next speaker, I'm going to actually turn it over to our moderator for this next event, David Schull. David is a deputy director for the Preparedness Division here at Haggerty Consulting, where he leads the company's active threat portfolio. For the last 8 months, David has led the Haggerty Consulting team supporting Salt Lake County in Utah, their COVID-19 response and recovery. Elevated in June 2020 as a special assistant to the mayor on COVID-19, David serves and coordinates all actions taken on behalf of the county's leadership. So David, please, as we turn it over to connect to the federal perspective and the perspective that we just got from Brock and Jesse to the situation in El Paso, we will turn it over to you.
Great, and good afternoon, everyone. This is somewhat of a reunion for me. 8 months ago, working with many partners that are on this call on CCTA planning and exercises. And then March 4th came around, and here I am in Salt Lake, serving as the Salt Lake County's policy advisor to the mayor and coordinating officer for response and recovery. I hope all is well in Kansas City region. I actually see some people from St. Louis too. And keep staying safe. Today, I wanted to introduce the mayor of El Paso, Mayor Dee Margo, who has joined us for discussion about crisis leadership. Mayor Margo is the mayor of the great city of El Paso, which is the 6th largest city in the state of Texas and the 2nd largest in Southwest United States behind Phoenix, Arizona. Mayor Margo has been serving as El Paso's mayor since 2017. His experiences include being a successful businessman, civilian aide to the Secretary of the Army, a critical player in regional economic development, forming what is now known as the Borderplex Alliance. Mayor Margo previously served as a member of the Texas House of Representatives and is been a member of a number of collaborative committees and organizations, including the Cancer Prevention and Research of Texas's Oversight Committee, the Texas Municipal League Executive Committee. He is the vice chair of the United States Conference of Mayors Criminal and Social Justice Committee, as well as serving as the conference's COVID-19 response and health equity working group. I want to just make sure, Mayor Margo, that you are good with audio. I think he has to unmute himself. Mayor Margo, can you unmute your mic? This is part of the
Sorry.
there you go. There you are, Mayor Margo.
We got lost here. Sorry.
No worries. Part of the complexity of a COVID-19 response, Zoom calls and audio and technical. Mayor Margo, thank you again so much for joining us. You've led El Paso through many crises, starting with immigration, followed by the August 3rd tragedy, now COVID-19. You have an exceptionally strong background in safety, for El Paso, as well as the binational neighborhood that El Paso is so integrated in. Really appreciate you joining us today.
My pleasure. Thank you.
So while I'm sure that our conversation will broach many topics in crisis leadership, including most likely the COVID-19 pandemic, I really wanted to focus in on the August 3rd tragedy, and to start there. You know, over a span of 6 minutes on August 3rd, lives were changed, lives were altered, lives were lost. 23 deaths, 25 injuries. The attack took place, marked one of the deadliest anti-Latino attacks in U.S. history. So, you know, I guess I'll start when I've been working with leaders in public safety agencies on active threat preparedness, I've always described that the effects of an active threat event ripple and impact communities for months, years, decades, and that response and recovery activities take place within a system of systems. This isn't just a law enforcement issue, a hospital issue. It's really a whole community operation, and the role of crisis leadership is key in managing that. So I want to begin our conversation actually before August 3rd. And in your time as mayor, before 10:39 in the morning on August 3rd, did you ever think that an event like this would take place in El Paso?
No, it's not anywhere near or indigenous to our nature and culture. And let me try to define us as best I can for your audience. Most people aren't aware of who we are, where we are, or what we're about. El Paso is part of a region with northern Mexico, which is Juarez, Mexico, and southern New Mexico. We say we're at the nexus of 3 states and 2 countries. Our history dates back over 350 years. We've been here since 1659, 361 to be exact. Until 1848, the bulk of our population was on the south side of the Rio Grande. In 1848, Fort Bliss came to El Paso, and we had some migration north. In the 1880s, the railroads came. But the bottom line is we've been one region. We are the largest binational, bilingual, bicultural region in the Western Hemisphere. We're 2.7 million people with an average age of 31. That includes Juarez and southern New Mexico. And most people, I found out, especially during the immigration crisis, when national media designated us as ground zero, and they'd come in from the East Coast, most people had never been here, and they didn't even know where we were. I remember telling one anchor for one of the networks, we're located with the largest U.S. city on the Mexican border, due south of Albuquerque. And our population is 85% Hispanic. So that gives you a little context of who we are and where we are and what we're kind of about. But no, I would never expect anything like this. Our community has had families on both sides of the border for over 300 years. Mm-hmm. There's commerce on both sides, families on both sides, culture, the whole thing. And that's what makes us unique and special, in my opinion.
Thank you, Mayor. I want to delve a little bit deeper and just talk about your personal experience. You just mentioned you never expected it to be and El Paso is a great community. Absolutely love it. How did you find out about the incident? And once you learned, what were your immediate thoughts?
Well, as a matter of fact, I was in Austin, Texas at the time, attending a board meeting of a board that I was on at the time. It had happened to finish that Saturday morning about 11:30 Austin time, which is 10:30 El Paso time. And I started getting notices on my city phone from our E911 about an active shooter. There were mixed messages coming in. The first one was the active shooter, but we don't think there have been any injuries, any deaths. And then it migrated more so to could be multiple shooters, could be multiple deaths. We don't know. So I was on my way to see a former staffer that I had with me in Austin when I was in the legislature, who just had a new baby. And I was just driving by to see the new baby. And then I was due to head home that night at 6 p.m. on the next flight, direct flight into El Paso from Austin. I got to his house, national news was on, and there's El Paso live. And I look at that, I started getting more texts from the city manager and elsewhere. And I just said, holy, you know what, I got to get home. So he had the ability to arrange a private plane for me. And so I jumped in the car, headed to the airport. And on the way to the airport, the governor calls me and says, who's a friend. And he said, I understand you're in Austin. Would you like to go back to Austin, to El Paso with me in the state plane? I said, no, sir, I'm already close to the airport. I'll meet you there. So we got there, and before I boarded the plane, I'll never forget, CNN was calling me with Wolf Blitzer wanting to know what was going on. And the last text I had was saying that there could be as many as 3 shooters, which turned out to be incorrect. And I just told him that's all I know. And I jumped on the plane the plane did not have any web access. So for the next hour and a half, I just looked out the door of the plane and prayed. That's about all I could do.
Thank you, Mayor, for such a personal perspective on those horrific moments. Talking about prioritization. Here you were, hundreds of miles away from El Paso, where you call home, where you lead. What sort of, priorities from a virtual sense when you're far away, you're trying to lead your city through crisis, and how did you implement those priorities? And then let's talk about once you landed on the plane too. But first and foremost, what was it like prioritization from Austin?
Well, to be candid, there wasn't a whole lot else I could do other than try to receive information from our city manager and the leaders. We have a city manager form of government, so operationally, it's handled irrespective of my position as mayor, as the political head of our city.
Mm-hmm.
So I have great confidence in our law enforcement. Public safety is a big issue for us. My assumption was that they were doing what they needed to do, and frankly, there wasn't anything else I needed to do. When I landed, I was met by my dignitary detail and rushed over to what we call our 9/11 Fusion Center.
Mm-hmm.
And there I had briefings with our police, FBI, DOJ, Texas Department of Public Safety, Texas Rangers. There wasn't anybody from a law enforcement standpoint that wasn't in that room as we started going through it. Customs and Border Protection, everybody. Fort Bliss had their representative there. We were all in there. I was given a copy of this Creed manifesto from the shooter, and waited for a conference locally and what's going on.
Agency, which you just listed about 10 different agencies, and I'm sure that there were many others in the Fusion Center with you. What was your role as a political head of El Paso, the political executive of El Paso, in organizing the response, or was that really, empowered down to the city manager, and how did you balance those two leadership roles?
Well, our Emergency Operations Center, which is also based at our 9/11 Fusion Center, controlled and handled all of that. And that's under the auspices of our fire chief, mm-hmm. who does an excellent job. And one of his deputy chiefs is the direct oversight of the Emergency Operations Center. And so they gathered everyone in there. And then I was functioning as kind of a chair of the meeting and asking for input from all of them, and each of them gave me their response as to what was going on and what we knew about the shooter and about the what had happened at the Walmart, how many people were there, what was where we were from a trauma standpoint at the hospitals.
Mhm.
Just gathering all that information as much as we could. So we had reports from everyone.
And with all this information, information overload, you knew the national attention was already being garnered on El Paso. I mean, you knew about that in the airplane, correct?
Yes, I knew about it. Yes,
Mhm.
I knew, but I'd never really experienced it. So I knew about it. I couldn't tell you I knew what to expect.
And talking about not knowing and thinking through expectations, the larger messaging operation that you were thrusted into, can you talk a little bit about that experience? Did you even have time to know your place at that moment, or was everything being pushed where that personal perspective couldn't even be garnered?
We waited until the governor arrived, which was just a little bit after I had arrived, about 30 minutes later. We made sure everyone was brought up to speed with the information to date from our chief of police and Department of Public Safety. To understand what had transpired, at 10:39 that Saturday morning, August 3rd, first call went out to the 911.
Mm-hmm.
At 10:45, two police officers entered, one a 6-year veteran and one a rookie, 1 day off his probation, entered without hesitation, not knowing that the shooter had left. At 11:06, the shooter was apprehended by 2 El Paso Police Department motorcycle police and 2 Department of Public Safety police. He had apparently gotten lost. This guy had come from 700 miles away, pure evil, white supremacist, an attack on who we are. And that's what we did. We took it personally. It was an attack on who we are. And I stated publicly that day, and I've stated it since, I do not believe a shooter would have ever come from our region. This person had to come from 700 miles away.
Mm-hmm. And you're emphasizing that public trust in El Paso is extremely strong. I've had an opportunity to talk with the emergency manager of the city of El Paso a few times. I've been over at the Texas Emergency Management Conference and have a few years and have spoken with him. What was the public trust on that day and the days after? It was shattered. Was it reinforced? You just mentioned you took it personally. Can you talk a little bit about that? How do you make sure that the public trust is behind the response? And what role does messaging and information play in that?
Well, we planned our press conference with the governor, with me, and with our chief of police to be able to convey exactly and articulate exactly what had happened and what had transpired since that morning. And this is about, I want to guess, around 4 o'clock. I can't remember, but just a few hours. And the thing I wanted to convey was that this event will not define us and we will not be fearful. I wanted to avoid we wanted to make sure everyone knew what had transpired, what the status was of the injured, what the status was of those who had passed away. We set up a family center at one of our middle schools, actually elementary school. The El Paso Independent School District brought in their cafeteria people. They set it up. All the families had that as the place to go, and we would notify them once the victims had been identified. One of the best pieces of advice that our governor gave me, after having gone through other events, we were his third, as a matter of fact. Mm-hmm. He said, you've got to get the crime scene processed as fast as you can to release the victims to the to the morgue and then to the funeral homes so they can start the closure with their families.
Mhm.
And sometimes those types of scenes can stay open for many days.
Mhm.
I alerted our assistant chief of police that we needed to do this and do it expeditiously without harming any of the evidence that was required. It was a horrific scene,
Mhm.
from outside the Walmart to inside. It was obliteration.
Mhm.
Talking to some of the police that saw that firsthand, they said they'd never seen such carnage.
Mhm.
So people, I just don't understand how bad that was. But anyway, I asked them to process, and so from basically noon on Saturday till 4 o'clock on Monday, I think it was 4 or 5 o'clock, they had everything processed, FBI and all of that, so they could start the closure process with the victims. And the toughest part was having them notified bit by bit. I
Mhm.
went over to the school. I went to all the funerals. I don't ever want to do that again.
Mhm. If you don't mind, just talking about recovery and how's the city doing? Is this still, you said you didn't want this event to be the focal point of El Paso because it is a great city and you have a great community. Can you talk about what recovery has been like through an active threat event, through El Paso, the August 3rd event?
Well, we created a fund for the victims and their families. We opened it up, and then we set a finite timeline, and I think the last of the funds were distributed by last December, as I recall.
Mm-hmm.
And we set that up with a nonprofit and some outside resources, two of our local nonprofits. We set up a family resiliency center for anyone who needs help, mentally, financially, or whatever.
Sure.
That's the United Way is overseeing right now.
Mm-hmm.
We determined that we needed a memorial service as soon after the event as we could to try to bring a formal closure for the community.
Mm-hmm.
We had a temporary one on the Sunday night after the shooting on the Saturday before with a number of speakers. And then in September afterwards, we held a large gathering and streamed it live. Our local that helped to a great extent. You remember what people don't understand is there were 9 victims from Mexico. There were 9 Mexican citizens as a part of this.
Mm-hmm.
And people used to ask me, well, isn't that surprising? And that's my whole point of why I did the preface and the preamble to tell you who we are and where we are. That's normal. It is normal under most circumstances. This pandemic is very limiting because of non-essential travel restrictions. But it's normal to have people over here and over in Juarez on a daily basis. And so, this was truly an attack on who we are, who we are as a community. And that was what I said. I will never allow this to define us. It will be part of our history, but it will be a footnote.
One last question before turning it over. Thank you first and foremost, Mayor. Again, I know that I've interviewed Mayor Dyer in Orlando. I've spoken with individuals that responded to Sandy Hook, and I've talked to your chief in the EOC. You have attention of elected officials across Missouri and Kansas with you today. And, as a final question from me to you, What lessons learned in crisis leadership, whether it was August 3rd tragedy, whether it's this current pandemic, can you convey how, in crisis communication, in crisis management, and how preparedness, are these events changing how you think preparedness, emergency preparedness works?
I've been asked to serve on multiple panels with some of the mayors that you've told me through the U.S. Conference of Mayors,
Mm-hmm.
Pittsburgh, Orlando, Parkland,
Mm-hmm.
you name it. I think I've been with San Jose, all of them. We've all shared our respective things. And people ask me about crisis management, and I've made the comment, I don't really think I know crisis management. All I've done is survive them. And what I've learned in the survival is that you need to be clear and concise with your information. And the more you can get that out and be candid, the better it will be for all concerned. I think those that have problems are the ones who wait too long to get the information out, even if it's only piecemeal. Get out what you know to be correct. That doesn't jeopardize any of the investigations or otherwise. We had a lot of active shooter training, and we have a very active law enforcement community here.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone responded to that. I cannot tell you. If you go back and look at the videos from the cable news networks, you'll see Customs and Border Protection's BORTEC unit, which is their SWAT team. You'll see everybody here. You'll see every policeman virtually. They strapped on their vest. They came in their shorts after mowing their yards that morning, and everybody responded. It's just a phenomenal community. Mm-hmm. Our police department was lauded nationally, but that's about all I can say. Is that it was. I went to the hospital the next day. We had people giving blood. The most interesting, to me, the most interesting anecdote I can give you about our community is I'm over at the hospital on the Sunday afternoon, and I'm visiting with the grandparents of a 10-week-old baby whose parents perished protecting him in that shooting. And they'd been notified about the mother, but not officially about the father. So while I'm there, they get the call about the father. This is past. There are people that have been waiting 11 hours to give blood, streamed all the way around the building. And I tell people, that's what defines us. That is what's unique. And the outpouring was just phenomenal. So that's really about all I can add to it, unless y'all have any other questions.
Mayor, thank you so much for taking time with us today. I do have a few questions from the audience, if you don't mind me asking.
No, go ahead.
Okay, so first question. In terms of, you mentioned the manifesto. Have you received any indication from the FBI or Texas Bureau of Investigation on anti-immigrant activities prior to August 3rd? The question is from the interest of understanding local elected officials and their interaction with state and federal investigators. What sort of exchange of information was there?
Well, we have good information there, and I don't recall any particular issues. The immigration crisis started in October of 18. I was notified by Customs and Border Protection. We have 6 of the 18 bridges that go from Texas to Mexico. It's our largest trading partner. It's a critical component. Not counting the families on both sides, but CBP and ICE alerted me in October of 2018 that they were going to have to start releasing processed migrants coming in from the Central American countries of El Salvador and Honduras and Guatemala. Those were the only countries that were driven by the immigration crisis because of the William Wilberforce Anti-Trafficking Victims Act, which was designed under the Bush administration to provide support for unaccompanied minors traveling from those three countries contiguous to Mexico into the United States through Mexico. And they were given unfettered entrance to claim asylum because of fear that those unaccompanied minors would be used in drug trafficking or as in human trafficking, drug trafficking or human trafficking. So that opened up, and then court decisions decided. Originally, that law said you had to enter at a port of entry, and then the court decision said no, you could enter anywhere along. So basically, it just opened the door, and they were overwhelmed. The processing centers we have here in El Paso that ICE had before were designed for individual male Mexicans. They weren't designed for families and pregnancy and children and all that. So we had this release in our community. They typically stayed here for only 24 to 48 hours. We used our NGOs, the Annunciation House, and some others to help feed the migrants that they've been processed and contact their sponsors, so they were transported to all over the United States, which is a lot of things people didn't understand. They were probably in your communities, but that went on from October of 18 until July of 2019, and every day I received a text message for the number of releases. The reason we hit national news was in December the 23rd of 2018. They released them without telling us. That was the agreement was we got 24-hour notice, and then the news media showed up and called us ground zero. But up until that time, to give you the context, I never had any issues related other than the response we were doing in volunteering and feeding them. I and my grandchildren and my wife would feed them as they came in and things like that. It was just, we have a very, we're not a sanctuary city. We work well with law enforcement, but we haven't had any issues like that at all. And I will say this, even if it doesn't come up, I haven't not had any questions posed to me related to gun control. The issues for us were racial, racist. That's the issue for us. So on all the panels I'm with, Chicago or elsewhere, and they're talking about gun control and this and that, I've never had a single question posed to me about that. It was an attack on us as to who we are.
I'm going to give you a second to pause, Mayor, and ask a question to Brock Long. Brock, when you hear the story and the experiences that Mayor Margo has gone through, what are the similarities and differences that you've observed from a federal perspective in El Paso, as well as others that you've witnessed through your decades of working on this issue?
Well, I can tell you that complex coordinated attacks or active shooter events don't discriminate by community. We hear about Paris, we hear about Boston, we hear about the big cities it takes place. But if you look, like during my time at FEMA, you had Stoneman Douglas High School, you had a small church in Sutherland, Texas. And if you look at the small event that took place in Sutherland, Texas, the population is 600 people, and they lost almost 5% of their population that day. So don't get complacent as to it's not going to happen here. Again, put yourself in that seat of, are you doing everything possible right now to lead and protect your community? The other thing too, again, I want to go back to, if immigration and the spotlight on immigration was, elevating the threat levels, what are those in your community? What are the controversial private businesses or, government decisions? What is it that's taking place in your community that puts you on a radar screen and you become fodder for CNN, Fox News, whatever it may be, major news media? Your threat is escalating. And then what is standing in the way of you being safe? So another escalating factor, if I remember correctly, in the Parkland shooting, the police in that community could not get the juvenile justice system to issue a search warrant. And the child, the perpetrator, the shooter, ended up, if I remember, getting like 14 knocks at the door from public safety, but were never allowed entry into the school. So when that is occurring and the kid is making threats, what is the legal stuff that's standing in the way of you being able to, take threat assessment information and act upon it, very quickly? But again, these events don't discriminate. Throughout my career, I've seen, when I was director of Alabama Emergency Management, we had a shooting in North Alabama, Huntsville. One of the biggest things, not only was it a terrific shooting, but the shooting was focused on staff, and the school lost its entire ability to, not only did they lose great community members, but they lost its entire ability to continue on with their biology program. They had to figure out continuity of operations down the road. And, and I've also seen shootings where somebody decides to hop in a car for no reason, where the FBI is not going to be able to provide you information or threat assessment, where they just hop in a car and decided to drive across 3 counties in southern Alabama and shoot people at gas stations or grocery stores. And there's no real rhyme or reason to it other than possibly mental illness. And so, the bottom line is that, don't focus on one type of event or one type of shooting or the intel that's coming in. You just got to be ready and really take a blue sky day mindset of, is our threat level increasing? What's getting in the way of us being effective? And again, your span of control and your ability to continue to meet mission essential functions in the long term after a big event.
Thank you, Brock. For Jesse, when you think about the El Paso tragedy that escalated from a local to a regional to a national to an international event from media attention, how does that impact the way you prepare to communicate in an incident like this and help leadership like Mayor Margot through this?
Absolutely. Great question. So, I think, to Mayor Margot's point and what we discussed about earlier, making sure that it's timely, accurate information, getting it out still as quickly as possible, especially when you have the national media paying attention to something like this. There's a lot of mis and disinformation that's flying around. And so getting your hands on the facts, making sure those facts are getting out in a timely manner is really important. I think what Mayor Margot did too, that I think is a really good takeaway for everybody, especially if you have a situation that is becoming one of national significance like this, having the governor of that state or, another elected leader who is in control and helping you craft that narrative is really important. It bolsters the community's response. It also shows that there's unity of effort taking place. A lot of times what the national media will try to do is find ways to divide leaders during these moments. So it's really important as most often as you can to show that unity of effort, especially when events like this are taking place. I think the last thing I would say to that too, one of the things I learned very quickly at FEMA, during my experience there, is having a regular cadence that the media knows that you're going to pay attention to them and cater to them and give them information is really, really important. So whether that's a news conference, whether it's having the mayor and some of the local officials get on a call with them and kind of a pen and pad format to discuss the operation and what's taking place, but keeping those audiences informed, so that the coverage does not detract away from the operation. Instead, it's bolstering that support. So again, the timely and accurateness, showing unity of effort, and then constant communication.
And I guess I'll start with Jesse and Mayor Margot, if you have any perspective here. How do you balance that need to immediately report as well as to get accurate information out? And Jesse, if you want to start.
Yeah, I think Mayor Margot hit the nail right on the head. Even if it's piecemeal information and you just have a little bit of a piece of the equation put together, showing the public that you're proactively trying to get the information out to them, I think goes a long way in establishing credibility and rapport. So even if you don't have the full picture, saying that, I think even goes a long way. But the public knows that you're there, you're thinking of them, and wanting to get that information to them, and will get that information to them as quickly as possible.
Jesse, if I may comment on that too, I think each one of you should learn how to pivot questions very quickly with the media. And I had to do this in front of Congress and media all the time. And one of the best pivot questions I would always, put forward is, that's a great question, but the question we're asking is X, Y, Z, so that you control the narrative rather than them just bombarding you with question after question after question. You've got to learn the pivots to be able to just say, that's a great question, but here's what we're focused on, and learn those things.
One thing I made that I was very judicious about when it came to immigration and August 3rd and now this pandemic is I did not politicize any of it.
Mm-hmm.
I did not attack anyone. And too often I'm seeing that out there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why we had some credibility on what I would say and how we responded. I thought that served no useful purpose, and it wasn't resolving the issues at hand. And but I will tell you that there were a lot of folks who really wanted to politicize it.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted to attack leadership in the White House, governor or otherwise. Congresswoman was that way and elsewhere. I refused to do that and have refused that today. But I think that also helped from a credibility standpoint and balance. And I just think that there's no useful purpose. I spent 35 years as a CEO. I'm not a politico.
Mm-hmm.
And I want the facts, and I want to get the information out, and the dadgum well better be credible.
Mm-hmm. This brings up my final question to each of you. I took notes all through this. So Mayor Margo, thank you once again. Brock, Jesse, on behalf of everyone, thank you very much. 2 big points. Public trust, Mayor Margo, you just kept on reinforcing, and this regional coordination that literally spanned a country border is just so pivotal and key to the points that I've brought up. This is this seminar is part of a regional exercise program focused on strengthening and enhancing capabilities of preventing, mitigating, responding, and recovering from an active threat event, a complex coordinated terrorist attack, an intentional attack, whatever you'd like to call it. From your perspective, for the audience, are these incidents, in these incidents, who is not being brought to the table to prepare, and that the jurisdictions on this call should consider? Throughout your experiences in crisis management, crisis communication, just leading the 6th largest city in Texas, going through these tragedies, who did you not expect to be there, but was there for you? And we'll start with Mayor Margo.
David, I'm not sure how to answer that. I'm trying to recall if I thought there was any. Everybody responded exceptionally well, admirably. I didn't mention the fact that we had at our subsequent press conferences the Mexican Consul General from El Paso,
okay,
who was excellent, who could articulate them. When we did our memorial service at our ballpark in September, I had the governor for Chihuahua. I had the president of Mexico's foreign ambassador.
Mm-hmm.
We had, it was a true binational event recognizing who was impacted
mm-hmm.
as a community. So I thought everybody stepped up. We filed charges on the state for capital murder, and the Department of Justice filed hate crimes.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that was also articulated in how we were handling this. Now, it's the governor had the state legislature had already set aside dollars because of the prior shootings that we talked about, and then like a week or two later, Odessa has 9.
Yep.
Has the shooting with 9. So, it was kind of like we're all in this together.
Yeah.
And I talked to the mayor of Odessa and the mayor of Midland, and so we've all kind of just commiserated for all intents and purposes and supported everyone else.
Mm.
But I think everybody, I was just gratified by the outpouring and the support by all of our community, including the nonprofits. And I think culturally, all the media that was here that following week from all over the world and every major network, cable and national,
Mhm.
would say to me either before my interview with them or after my interview that they could not get over the hospitality and the support that El Paso was providing them. It was
Mhm.
phenomenal.
Mhm. Brock, do you have any?
Yeah, sure. I got a couple things. One, we got to start looking at citizens as a force multiplier in our efforts. I mean, we don't bring citizens into our training and exercise enough, or different stakeholders within our citizenry to come in and really start to train citizens on what we need them to do. And I often got frustrated with the Department of Homeland Security's See Something, Say Something program. It was always a one-way program that said, if you see something, say something, call this number. And I'm not so sure that the information that was being collected from our citizenry was really pointing us into the right direction of, meaningfully overcoming some of the threats that were persistent within our communities. And I think that we've got to start asking the citizens, if you see XYZ, please call these people or whatever else. I mean, I really think that the See Something, Say Something program needs to be two-way communication. We have to guide citizens on what to look at when we get threat assessment information coming in from the FBI or local police, whatever it may be. We've got to use them as a force multiplier. Plus, I think as a nation, we got to rethink the training. Run, hide, fight is not the not the answer to all the training that needs to be put out there. There's a large majority of people that cannot run, hide, or fight. My elementary school child is not going to necessarily run, hide, fight, or senior citizens or people with access and functional needs. So it's not just we've done run, hide, fight, we're good. It's constantly training, and it's training in other areas. It is, CPR and other tangible skills that are needed before, during, and after an event, and how to funnel information. The other thing too is that within your communities, we've really failed to bring in the private sector, the larger, corporations in your communities, or the vulnerable, people in your community, the businesses that may cause tension or elevate your threat hazard again, into the planning fold, and how you're going to communicate when it's the private sector, if a shooting occurs in the private sector versus a government facility. And so I really think that you've got to refocus on, identifying who are the private sector companies that we need to be interfacing with now within our communities, the Walmarts of the world, but also any of the other newspaper businesses, anything else that's causing a lot of, political commotion. You need to be engaging them and making sure that they have plans in place, along with how you can support these different, private sector organizations. So, unfortunately, I wish, David, we had another 8 hours to go through all of this.
Yeah.
But I think,
Just so,
unfortunately, there's a lot of ground to cover.
yeah,
David, could I add something?
absolutely, Mayor.
I left out, and I don't want to be remiss. Walmart's training
Yeah.
was phenomenal. There were lives saved because they had practiced and knew what to do in a tragedy of this type. Their manager was phenomenal. He's a hero. He got people out. He got them out quickly. That was one of their largest Walmarts here. It was packed, as it would be on a Saturday morning, with families, people shopping. Part of the ritual sometimes to our culture.
Mm-hmm.
And they did a phenomenal job. And they need to be recognized for that.
And just if you have a minute of just talking about even through recovery, not just the immediate response, what was your interaction with Walmart, given that was the hub of where this incident took place?
I thought they did a tremendous job. I met with them. Their CEO flew in with all of their security people and met with me and the chief of police 2 days afterwards, to talk about where we were and how they identified threats, etc. They did a memorial, which was a candela. We're a very Catholic community, and I will tell you, I think it is a tremendous memorial for the victims.
Mm-hmm.
And we dedicated it in November of last year. And unfortunately, we had the 23rd member died after 9 months.
Mm-hmm.
A soccer coach died protecting his wife and kids. He spent 9 months in ICU. I can't tell you how many operations he had, but he finally succumbed in April of this year. And that, to me, he was a real hero, hanging on as long as he did. But anyway, that's. I thought they have been highly responsive, and what they did was, when people wanted them to tear down the store and not do it, they did not. They got input from people, and they did a complete remodeling and revamp. And I went to that opening, and life needs to go on, and that was the big thing we were trying to get across. And I'll also tell you, the families did not want multiple memorials throughout the city. They said they didn't want to go to every corner and see a reminder.
Mm-hmm.
So the Walmart is the primary memorial we have. We've talked about there's one of our county parks where they're going to put a wall up with the names, and unfortunately some of my politicos want to do more, but I don't really think we're in a position to do more.
Just one final question, if you indulge me all. In terms of the lessons learned through these crises, through these tragedies, part of this past year has been civil unrest, communities being pushed apart. What has been your sort of observations, or what you've learned in the various ways that the cities have been responding, the challenges that they have been dealt with? And Mayor, if you have any thoughts there.
We haven't been impacted on the Black Lives Matter issue the same way others are. 4% of our population is that, but we're a minority majority.
Mm-hmm.
Frankly, we're getting more impacted with the pandemic than we are otherwise because of that.
Mm-hmm.
We're heavily Hispanic, and that we're considered one of the most vulnerable populations to COVID-19.
Yep.
And right now, frankly, as soon as we get off, I've been on the phone with the governor before. We're spiking right now.
Mm-hmm.
We're having some real issues. So I've been dealing with more with that than anything else. We have a very open community with all races. We are, I don't think you could never accuse El Paso of having any kind of a racist atmosphere at all.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly you'll have a few outsiders here and there, but not as a whole. I mean, we're a multicultural city.
Yep.
And we're different from Dallas, Houston, and the parts in Kansas and elsewhere. We're just different.
Yep.
And I think that's what makes us special.
You're a great special. El Paso is absolutely wonderful. I've been down to Fort Bliss before, and it was always nice to stop in El Paso before heading up next door. So I'm going to turn it over. Patrick, do you have any final?
First, David and Mayor Margot, thank you so much for your time. To close out our seminar, I am going to hand it over to David Warm, the Executive Director for the Mid-America Regional Council. David?
Hi, folks. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Jesse. Thank you, Brock, Patrick, David. You're a great interviewer. This has been exceptionally helpful. One of the things, Mayor, that we pride ourselves about in this metropolitan area is that we have demonstrated since the days of 9/11 a couple of decades ago that it pays off to bring the community together in advance to plan for big incidents. And we do work shoulder to shoulder when the hurricane happens, the tornado happens, and when other incidents happen. And your thoughtfulness today, your openness, your candor has been really appreciated, and it's going to help us reinforce the kind of mutuality and common support that we lend to each other here in Kansas City. So thank you so much to all of you for taking your job seriously here in the Kansas City area to the panelists and our sponsors and David for presenting such an effective and useful program. Thank you all.
Thank you. We will follow up with an email to our participants with key takeaways, presentations, and notes. Thank you for your time.
Thank you again, everyone.